We are now recording. Let me share my screen again. And we will get started. So welcome to Acquisitions Administration end of year setup or end of year closeout and setting up the new fiscal year. In this workshop, what I'm really hoping we can do is to have everyone working kind of hands-on within your acquisitions administration and actually go through the process of closing out and then getting everything set up for next year live in this workshop. If you're not comfortable doing that just yet, if you'd like to be able to sort of watch and then come back later and maybe go along with the recording, that's totally fine. It's up to you how you engage with this, but the idea is that we will be doing this live, so I will give you plenty of time to actually engage in the different steps of the process as we go through. This is set up as a video call, not a webinar, so everyone should be able to easily unmute yourself to ask questions and things like that. Feel free to put things in chat, but also feel free to just share your question as you need it. If you are going to be putting in questions in chat, one thing that might help this to move at a good pace is if you can raise your hand. That'll let me know that you're typing something in chat, so I don't move on before you finish typing. Acquisitions can be kind of complex, so questions might take a while to type out, and I want to make sure that I am giving everybody enough time to actually get those questions out there. So if you'll be typing in chat for a question, just raise your hand first so that I kind of know to pause and wait for that question to come through. But as we go through, please stop me if you are a little bit behind, or if you're confused, or if you're not seeing in your account what I am showing in my screen. And hopefully by the end of this session, everybody is ready to get their new year going and start ordering. So we're going to start by taking a look at just the fiscal year closeout process. This is something that we did cover back in early April when we did our initial end of year workshop, and that was more of sort of a getting everything ready to close out workshop. So we went through how to make sure that all of your purchase orders are in the right state and all your invoices are closed prior to actually closing out, and we did a dry run at that time. Hopefully between then and now, you have had a chance to get everything in order and that you are ready to do the closeout. If you do have any remaining questions, I know several of you have reached out to me over the last month or so with sort of oddball issues that you've come across in purchase orders that aren't doing what you expect them to do, or invoices that aren't closing. So hopefully everyone's kind of worked out all of those little issues. I know there are a couple that are still lingering, but that I believe at this point should not impact your closeout, even though they're still appearing kind of funky in the way that they're showing up within Evergreen. But if there is anything lingering as we move forward, feel free to chime in with that, and we may be able to deal with it in the call. It may be something others are dealing with. If it's a really complex issue that dives deep into how you've got a purchase order set up, then I may ask you to set up a time with me to go through a one-on-one. So we'll just kind of deal with those things as we come across them. So after we have gone through the actual fiscal year closeout process, then we will talk about the next step of setting up the new fiscal year, which is creating any new funding sources and any new funds. So the fiscal year closeout itself will propagate any funds that you have set to do so. So if you have a standing adult fiction fund that you reuse each year, then the closeout process will propagate that fund. But if you have any new funds that are coming in this year, anything that you didn't set to propagate that you need to recreate, or anything that is new this fiscal year, then we'll also go through the process of setting those up from scratch. And then we'll talk about applying credit and allocating funds. And then if there are any lingering questions after anything, we will deal with those at the end. As I said, feel free to bring up your questions as we go. That way everybody can sort of stay on the same page and actually work through the process live. But if there are questions that remain, we'll hopefully have some time for those at the end. Now, before we dive in, are there any questions anyone has prior to getting started? Anything that they need to address before we actually take a look at the process of closing out?
Samantha, I have a question.
Yeah.
But if you're going to address this, I can wait. The open POs that you were talking about closing out, we choose not to close those out because we allow our encumbrances to roll over. Would you still close?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so you wouldn't close them, correct? That's the way we do it.
Right. I think not very many of our libraries have encumbrances roll over, so that's one of the main reasons that we talk about the,
Okay.
Making sure that your POs are set to, are basically either received or canceled. But
Right.
if you are rolling over encumbrances, obviously you don't want to do that because you
Right.
want that
And I
those
just wanted
encumbrances
to
to stand.
clarify that because
Yeah.
that's the way we've been doing it. In case someone does roll over encumbrances, you got to leave those POs open. So sometimes you place orders in, say, late May, early June, and Baker and Taylor and Ingram does not get them shipped to you by June 30th. So you've already purchased those or placed an order for that. So we allow those to stay open and we roll over those encumbrances into the new funds for the new year.
Yeah. So anyone else who does roll over encumbrances, you do not need to have every PO received or canceled. Only the ones that you have actually received or actually canceled. So each library's individual sort of PO status will be based on what their policies are for rolling over. If you don't roll anything over, then you do need to have everything received or canceled. If you do, then what you need to have done by this point is ensure that anything you have received has been marked so that those encumbrances don't roll over. They've already been debited. And if there's anything that you have not yet received, those are the only things that should be remaining open. So it's really just a matter of making sure your purchase orders are clean prior to closing out, rather than necessarily saying received or canceled. But you do want to make sure that anything that has been received is marked received. All right, anything else before we get started? All right, so let's go ahead and get into our end of year procedure. And as I said, this is something that we did go over back in early April. And so since then, I've heard from several of you with various questions and things like that. But if you do still have some questions, please feel free. But what we're going to do today is the real deal. So in April, we did a dry run. Today, we will do another dry run just to make sure that everything looks right. But then we will follow it up with the actual closeout process. So we'll all cross our fingers for that. So at this point, all of your housekeeping should be done. If it is not, feel free to continue following along with us. Do the dry run, but in terms of the actual closeout and then the following setup, you'll need to wait till your housekeeping is done for that. But I believe that everybody I have heard from is in the right state for that. So we're going to start by taking a look at some funds. The whole procedure that we're going to be doing today happens within the fund administration interface. So you can navigate there from the acquisitions administration menu. So under administration and acquisitions administration, that's going to bring you to the admin splash page. And from here, we're going to go into fund administration. And this is really where we're going to be working throughout this process, is within this specific interface. A couple of things to note up here at the top, make sure that you are scoping to the correct library. So if you have everything owned at the system level, you do need to make sure that you are scoped to system. If you have things owned at a branch level, then you'll make sure that you are in the correct branch. If you are doing the closeout for all of your branches, but your funds are owned at the branch level, not the system level, then you'll want to go scope to your system and then click ancestors. And that's going to bring up every individual branch within your system. I do kind of recommend, if you're in that situation, that you kind of go branch by branch rather than doing everything at once, unless you feel very confident. And if you do, great. Feel free to do that. But if this is your first or second time doing this and you're doing multiple branches with the funds owned at the branch level, I'd recommend starting at the branch level here for your scoping. That's up to you, but just for the sake of staying on top of what's happening, that may be a little bit easier. Of course, that'll also depend on how many funds you have. If you only have one fund per branch, go ahead and do all of them. But so you'll want to make sure that you've got your scoping correct. So go ahead and ensure that you are at the system level for those of you whose funds are owned system-wide, at the system and ancestors level for those of you who are closing out multiple branches, or at the individual branch level for those of you who are closing out funds owned by a specific branch and only that branch. And let me know if you run into any problems there. If you're not sure where your funds are owned, I'd just start by typing in your system and seeing what comes up. Now, another thing to keep in mind as you're doing this is the filter. The year is filtered automatically to 2024. That is set by default. So if you have the funds for the closeout, the fiscal year we're closing out here, marked as 2023, you will need to change that filter. So if you're not seeing anything come up, it's possible the filter is the culprit there. So I am going to be using Onslow as my guinea pig. So Deborah, I hope that's okay. I'm in dev, so nothing I'm doing is going to affect anything anything live for you. And this will also give you a chance to correct me if I'm going down the wrong path, because
You're good. As long as you're in devs, you're good, because
yeah,
we're actually going to delay our rollover for a week or two. So
okay, well, this will be a good chance for you. Dev is significantly out of date, several months out of date. So this is not, I've cleaned some stuff up in this server, but this is not an accurate reflection of what yours are looking like right now. Just if anything looks too weird, just remember this is several months behind. All right, so I've got my library scope to the system because Onslow does have their funds at the system level. So I see that in my owner column here. And I've got my filter set at the default of 2024. That is where how Onslow has named this fiscal year. So just make sure that yours are correct for the specific set of funds you're closing out today. All right, so we are going to basically go through the process of the dry run, and then we're going to do it for real. So prior to this point, as I said before, your housekeeping should have been pretty much completed. So your pending items have been received or canceled or are literally actually pending, and you are rolling over those encumbrances. You do want to make sure, if you're planning to roll over encumbrances, that your rollover here in this column, second from the right, that those rollovers are set to yes. So for those of you who do not roll anything over, if your POs have been cleaned up properly, you won't see stuff rolling over because you won't have any remaining encumbrances, but still probably best to make sure that everything is set to no here if you do not roll over. If you do, make sure everything's set. So make sure everything's set to no if you do not roll over, and if you do roll over, make sure everything is set to yes. So just take a moment to take a look. Of course, like any grid interface in Evergreen, we can change how many rows we're looking at. So I can take this up to, it looks like there's only 18, so I didn't, 20 would have done it, but I set it to 100, so I've got everything showing up in one page. So just double check that everything looks like you expect it to look in terms of how rollover is set. And so Matthew is typing something in chat, so I'll give him a moment to get that set up.
If it would be okay, I'd just like to use my voice instead.
That's fine.
So previously, when we were a Polaris system, we would do that fiscal year rollover on 6/30, the June the 30th.
Mhm.
As so I'm understanding from this that I can pretty much do fiscal year rollover at any point that I feel comfortable. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Most
Oh,
people, we do have a few systems that have already done it, but most of our systems do it in early July.
okay. That is good to know. Thank you very much.
Yep. All right. So, if anyone, like I said earlier, if anyone is not yet done with their cleanup, I definitely encourage you to go back and watch the recording for the April webinar that we did. Just ensure that all your purchase orders and invoices are in the right shape for closeout, and then come back and watch this recording to do the live process. But feel free to follow along through the dry run right now, and that'll give you a look at maybe where some things might not be um, as clean as you'd like them to be. But today, we're going to start for going to start by taking a look at the concepts of propagation and rollover. So I mentioned that you want to make sure that if you roll over your funds, that is set correctly to yes. If you do not, that it's set to no. But let's talk a little bit about what that means. I know those of you who've been doing this for several years have a pretty good handle on this, but we do have a couple of new systems that are new to acquisition. So I wanted to do a brief review of what this actually means. So propagation and rollover. Essentially, when you set up your funds for the first time, you select whether or not those funds will propagate to your new fiscal year and whether or not the money in those funds would roll over, whether that is the balance or the encumbrance or both. So propagation is basically the process of recreating the same funds from year to year. All the settings will roll over and everything like that. So if you have a fund for adult fiction and you use that every year, you can have that propagate for your new year, so you don't have to set it up from scratch every year. If you have it set with, 100% balance stop percent and 95% balance morning, then that same setting is going to roll over into the newly propagated fund. Rollover is a little trickier. Propagation is something that I do recommend all of the libraries do for the majority of your funds. If you have special funds, things that are grant related or kind of one-off situations, you're probably not going to want to propagate those. But for most of your funds, those aren't going to change a lot year to year. So I do recommend propagation, and you can always go in and fiddle with them and make small changes as you need to. Rollover, on the other hand, is something that is actually fairly rare. So Onslow does this. A couple of our other systems do this, but a lot of our systems do not roll anything over. And that basically means moving either unspent money into the newly propagated funds, or money that has been encumbered for this year but has not yet been spent. So when you create a purchase order, it encumbers money against the fund. When you mark the items on that purchase order as received, it changes that encumbrance to a debit. So if you have purchase orders that are in the state of having been activated and ordered but not yet received, then you have encumbrances. Once they're received, then you have debits. And so what you're doing when you roll over your encumbrances is basically taking any money that has been earmarked for specific items that have been ordered but not yet actually spent. It rolls that over into the same fund for next year. Balance rollover is basically any money that is remaining in your fund. So let's say you had $10,000 in a fund and you spent 9,500 of that. That remaining 500 would then roll over into that same fund for next year. So whether or not you use either of these is based entirely on your library's finance department and or your local, your municipality or your county, whoever sort of needs the records of your expenditures will determine whether or not this is whether or not you can use either of these types of rollovers. So let's take a look at how we have this set up here in Onslow. And I think I changed a couple of these just for the sake of demonstration. So this is not necessarily reflective of how Onslow has it set up for everything. But in this case, when we look down at our propagation column, we see that all but one are set to propagate. And so this one that's not set, I've got marked as a grant, which is why I'm not propagating it. It's a sort of, it's specific to the year that I received the grant. I get that money. I don't get to continue spending it into next year. So I'm not going to be recreating this. Of my 18 funds, when I complete the closeout process, I will have propagated 17 funds. So I'll have 17 funds in my 2025 fiscal year, where I had 18 here. And that's because I have it set to no. So take a look at what you have in your propagate column. Make sure that anything that you intend to have next year is set to yes. And anything that you have set to no, just remember that next year you will have that many fewer funds once you've finished the process. Rollover, in this case, I actually have 2 that are set to no, which means that for 16 of the funds, of the 17 funds that I'll see next year, 16 of them will have any encumbrances remaining will show up on my funds for next year. Now, when we actually get into the closeout process, you'll have the ability to kind of set exactly how this will happen at that time. So we'll see that live in just a few moments. Now, if you do not allow any type of rollover, make sure these are set to no. It's possible to set your funds to propagate without rolling over funds or encumbrances. So if this is your first time doing this, just be aware that you can have yes in the propagate column and no in the rollover column, and things will function exactly as that would suggest, where you create the fund, but absolutely no money moves forward. So let's go ahead and do a dry run so we see what this is going to look like. This is a chance for you to test what your closeout will do. And if you see anything that doesn't look right, go back and fix it prior to the actual closeout. So for example, if you see that unspent funds are being rolled over and that's not what you want, then that gives you a chance to go back and change that selection prior to the actual closeout. If you, the same thing with encumbrances, you can go back and change that prior to the closeout. So as long as you have your scoping and filters correct, which means that you've scoped to the correct library and you've got the correct fiscal year set in your filter here, the next step is to make sure that everything is set correctly in terms of propagate and rollover. And if you do find that you have one that needs to be fixed, you can right click on it and choose edit selected. And so you could come in here and you could uncheck the propagate or rollover box. So if I uncheck rollover for this main library audiobooks fund, then let's see, where did it go? It moved it down the list for one thing, and then it changed the rollover from yes to no. So it's a fairly easy fix. So if you need to fix any of those right now, please go ahead and do so. And once we're all ready to go, then we will do our dry run. So I'll just give everybody a few moments to double check everything. All right, so I'm going to start my dry run. If anyone is still working to fix any of their settings, just let me know in chat and I'll slow it down a bit. But to start our dry run, we're going to come up here and click on fiscal, propagation, and rollover. And there are a couple of things that you need to set up in this modal before moving forward. So at the top, there's this drop down for year. And I will admit that this confused me a lot when I was first learning how to do this. So what you're actually, even though the default is set here to 2025, that makes it seem like you should choose the year you're creating. You actually want to choose the year you're closing out. And I don't know why it defaults to the next fiscal year for this closeout, but that's what it does. So I'm going to move this from 2025 to 2024. For those of you who have your fiscal year set as 2023, make sure you're selecting that one. Because we are doing the dry run, it'll be very clear if you select the wrong year. So you'll have a chance to fix that. But basically, you want to make sure that whatever you have set in this fund column here, in this case 2024, is what you are setting from this dropdown. So I'm going to choose 2024. The context org unit. This is straightforward if you are closing out your system as a whole, if your funds are owned by the system. If your funds are owned at various branch levels, then you'll need to include funds from descendant org units. This gets kind of complicated if you are scoped to a branch level to begin with. So when you are in the funds admin interface, if you have your branch set, obviously in this case there are no funds owned at the branch level in Onslow, but if there were and I was set to this, when I do my actual propagation and rollover, you'll see that my context org unit is that branch, which means that I would only be closing out funds owned by this branch. That's great if that's your goal, but if your goal is to close out multiple branches, then you'll need to come back in, change your scope to your system, and then you would choose all descendant org units when you do this. Now, obviously, if everything's owned at the system level, you don't need to check this box. I don't believe checking it will be a problem if things are owned at the system level. So just in case you have anything owned at a branch level, you might want to include this anyway. That's kind of up to you how you want to move forward through this. And as I said earlier, you may want to do branch by branch. But just make sure that you've got your year set to the correct fiscal year for your funds, whatever they're set to, and that you've got your context org unit is scoped to whatever, whichever org unit you are closing out funds for. All right, so the next section down here is about propagation. So propagation, as we talked about before, basically creates new funds for the next fiscal year based on the funds you're closing out this fiscal year. This is going to happen automatically on anything that you have propagation set to yes for. So if you've got it set to yes, you're going to get that fund propagated. If you have it set to no, you won't get that fund propagated. It's fairly straightforward, but that is why you want to make sure that you've checked that before moving into this section. Because you don't have any way to kind of manipulate it within the modal itself. Rollover, on the other hand, you do have a couple of choices that you can make at this point. So your library settings actually may impact these at the server level. So if you see something behave differently than what I'm describing during this process, it could be that you have a library setting that's impacting it. So if you do see something that doesn't look like what I'm showing you, let me know in the chat or unmute yourself and let me know, and we'll double check what's going on there. So in order to move forward, everyone needs to check this first box, perform fiscal year closeout. So this little question mark doesn't work. But basically, checking this box is how we close out the funds, which is the point of what we're doing. If you don't want anything to roll over, that needs to be set in the funds themselves. So the funds themselves should be set to no for rollover. However, if you want encumbrances to roll over but not balance, this is where you can determine that. So I'm going to check limit fiscal year closeout to encumbrances. So earlier when we talked about rollover, I talked about the idea that you can roll over your remaining encumbrances, so that money that has been earmarked for purchases but has not yet been debited. Or you can roll over balances. And when you roll over the balance, you're taking all of the remaining money in that fund and putting it in the same fund for next year. If your library does no rollover, then basically you don't need to worry about this as long as rollover is set to no in all of your funds. If your library does encumbrances but not balances, you need to check this box. If you don't check this box, you'll roll over both encumbrances and balances. So just make sure that you are checking or not checking this box as needed. So is everybody on the same page with me here? Does anyone have any questions, or maybe you're not sure whether or not what you need to check here? Feel free to put it in chat, raise your hand, anything that you may need to do. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do our dry run. So I've got this box checked here for dry run, which means that no data will be changed. I'm going to see what will happen when I perform the closeout, but the closeout won't actually go through. So make sure that you've got this box checked. Make sure that you got your year set correctly. Your org unit is correct. You've got the perform fiscal year closeout box checked. And if you are rolling over encumbrances, but not balances, you've got this box checked. Remember, if you're not rolling over either, that needs to be set at the fund level, so should already be set to no for rollover. And then make sure dry run is checked. And we're going to go ahead and process. And I think some of you have probably already done this as you prepare for this workshop. So my dry run had 17 funds propagated. That's exactly what I expected, because remember I had 18 funds total and one was set to no for propagate. So I've only got 17 moving forward. 0 money is being rolled over because I have limited my fiscal year closeout to encumbrances. If I had unchecked this box, then I'd be rolling over balances as well. And then I've got just under $58,000 that is being rolled over in encumbrances. So this is all based on what I have set for my rollover option in each of my funds, and then what I've checked here. Now, if I were to change, uncheck this box for limit fiscal year closeout to encumbrances in my dry run, then you'd see that I have, in addition to the encumbrances rolling over, I have $41,000 rolled over to the next fiscal year. And I have a feeling that my county would not want me to do that. So I'm going to make sure that this box is checked. So just double check that this all looks correct. One thing you can do is open up 2 tabs looking at your funds, one that has the closeout box in it, so you can kind of check what's happening here in your dry run, and then the other one where you're actually looking at your funds, so you can make sure that the numbers all match and everything. If you are seeing anything that doesn't make sense or that you didn't expect, feel free to let me know and we can take a look at it. So a couple of things that you can look for here. If the number of funds propagated is higher than you expected, then you'll need to go back into your grid and determine which funds had propagated set to true that should not have propagated and fix that. I know that there are a couple libraries who don't propagate anything and create all funds manually each year. So if you are one of those libraries, make sure that you have 0 for propagation. If you see money rolling over and you don't expect that either for balances or encumbrances, again, if you're seeing balances roll over and you don't expect that, make sure this box is checked. If you're seeing encumbrances roll over, or anything roll over and you don't expect anything at all to roll over, then you need to go back into the funds themselves and change those settings. So go ahead and do any fixes that you need to. If you are not sure why something propagated or didn't propagate or rolled over or didn't roll over, let me know. And once you've finished fixing errors, then just give me a thumbs up or let me know in the chat and we will move on once that is all set. Right, I've seen a couple of thumbs up. If anyone is still working on fixing anything, just raise your hand so that I know that I should wait a little bit longer. Right, well, I will take that to mean that everyone is ready to move forward. So I am going to move forward. If you are still fixing some things and you run into anything that you have questions about, please feel free to ask and we can always pop back to it. But I'm going to go ahead and do this for real. So at this point, I've done a dry run. I know what changes I expect to see and I feel comfortable with them. They're what I expected. So I'm going to uncheck the box for dry run. And I get this little message here in yellow. It's letting me know that this is a real closeout. If I'm not ready for that yet, then I can do another dry run. But once I click process, this is going to happen for real. So I am going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to take a deep breath and cross my fingers, and this will take a little longer than the dry run did. If you're ready to do this with me, feel free to uncheck this box and click process. And so I get that little blue bar. That went actually a lot faster than I expected it to. But I got that little blue bar just showing me that things were moving forward. And it has finished, and I'm seeing that the same thing that I saw in my dry run has come through. That 17 funds propagated. No money, no balances were rolled over, and 5,700 and some dollars in encumbrances was rolled over, which is exactly what I was expecting to see. So I'm going to close this box. And now what I see within my 2024 filter is that most of these have remained, have moved from a yes in the active column to a no. The only one that still says yes is that grant, because the grant did not propagate to the new year. I can close this one manually by editing it and unchecking the active box. So because I didn't propagate it, it didn't close out. And that's fine. I didn't expect it to propagate. I didn't want it to propagate. So it's just a matter of coming in and manually deactivating it. So I can do that. And now everything in my active column says no for the fiscal year 2024. Additionally, if I change this filter from 2024 to 2025, now I see 17 funds. So these are those funds that propagated. They're all set to active, and they have the same settings I had last year, which means whatever my balance stop percent and warning were, those have moved forward with me. Whatever my settings for propagate and rollover for last year, those have moved forward with me as well. What did not move forward was any combined balance, because of course I did not roll that over. Had I rolled that over, I'd be seeing my balance here. Instead, it is still showing up in my 2024 funds. So these funds are deactivated. Oh, no, it's not, sorry. So these funds are deactivated. The money sort of no longer exists as far as Evergreen is concerned. And in 2025, I have new funds that I need to add money to. So that's what we'll be doing next. For those of you who are doing the live closeout right now, just let me know if you run into anything unexpected. There's some stuff that we can do on the back end to kind of fix anything that didn't work properly. So, for example, if you do get a balance here and you thought you had all of your rollover set to no, but you end up with a balance here, then we can go in and fiddle with that a bit to get rid of that balance. So let's talk about the final steps that we might want to do. Just checking everything. We want to make sure that our encumbrances are blank, so I can open up my fund and there we go. So by clicking on the name of the fund, I can open it up and I can just make sure that there's nothing here for encumbrance. Now, if I did roll encumbrances forward and there were encumbrances on this particular fund, then that number should be here. Let's see if I can find one that does have an encumbrance. So this one had an encumbrance, so that did roll forward. And so that's showing up here. If you did not have anything set to roll over, your encumbrances should be blank across the board. If you did roll over encumbrances, then any fund that had an encumbrance is going to show it. If it doesn't, it'll be blank. So it's all dependent on how your system works. Balances should be 0 unless you rolled over your balance. And so we're seeing, of course, that our balance here is blank. If I look inside a fund itself, then I can also see my combined balance and spent balance, and those are blank here. Had I rolled any of those over, they'd be showing up here if there was anything to roll over. So that is a matter of how you have those settings. And then, of course, as we already saw, your closed funds, so those from 2024 are showing as not active. Anything that didn't propagate will still say yes, and so you'll need to manually close that. Now, in the 2025 fiscal year, everything that, all of those encumbrances that rolled over are going to show up here. If you have remaining encumbrances and a total balance, let's take a look at this. Okay, so I'm seeing previous debits within this fund, but I'm not seeing any remaining balance. And I think that's what it should look like. You should not see any balance if you did not roll over any balance. I need to update that slide because I realized last year that it was incorrect, but I didn't fix it. So I apologize for that. So basically just go through, make sure that everything that you closed out is showing as expected. Anything that did not propagate, go ahead and deactivate. Anything that did propagate, double check that rollovers happened as expected, meaning if it did not roll over anything, all of these final rows in each fund should be blank. There should be no combined balance, spent total, debit total, or encumbrance total. There should be none of that. If you did roll over, then whatever you rolled over is what should show up, which means if you rolled over balances, you should have data in here. If you rolled over encumbrances, you should have data in here. Take a few minutes to just double check that everything happened as expected. If you see something incorrect that you'd like help fixing, please let me know. So I'm not seeing any messages in chat, so it looks like everyone is so far seeing what they expect to see. So we are going to move into setting up next year. So for starting a new year, there are a couple of you in here who are starting acquisitions from scratch. So for those of you in that boat, we are going to talk a little bit about creating new funds, and we'll go through the process of doing that. Some of you may actually be creating a new fund even though you're not starting from scratch. It may be that you have a grant or something like that, or you've decided to add a new fund for a new type of purchase. So we'll go through the process of actually creating a new fund, as well as going through the process of applying credit and allocating money into the funds that were propagated. So the steps to set up a new fiscal year, after having closed out the old one, the first thing we want to do is, if you have new funding sources, we'll create those. Now, funding sources are created within Evergreen in a way that allows you to use the same funding source from year to year. But I know some of our libraries do sort of start a new funding source each year, and that's totally fine. So we will talk about creating a new funding source for those of you who do that yearly, or for those of you who may actually have a new funding source this year. We will also create a couple of funds from scratch. So anything that was not created via propagation that we do need to have for this year, we'll go ahead and create that. Then we will apply credit to any of our new funding sources. The process is the same whether you're applying it to a newly created funding source or the same funding source you had last year. We'll apply credit. And then we will allocate money into the funds for the new fiscal year, whether those are brand new funds or propagated funds. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new funding source. So I'm going to come back into my fund administration. Up to this point, everything has happened within this interface, within this first tab for funds. We're going to click into our second tab for funding sources. I'm going to take my scope up to my system. So just like with the funds, whatever your system does for this, that's where you need to be scoped. If all funding sources are at the system level, scope to your system. If they are all at a single branch within that system, you can either put that branch in, or you can choose ancestors. If they're at multiple branches within a system, you'll probably want to scope to the system and click ancestors. So what we are looking at here are the existing funding sources. They are filtered to active, so I could remove this filter and I could see any deactivated ones. And at this point, it's kind of a matter of how your library wants to move forward with this, how your library manages this. If you create a new funding source for each year, then you'll want to deactivate your old one and then click new funding source to create a new one. If you have multiple funding sources and you're just adding a new one, you're going to keep any existing funding sources active and still create a new one. If all you do is take the same funding source, say your county budget, and just add new money each year, then we're not going to create a new funding source at all. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of this demonstration is I'm going to keep the existing one here active and create a new one. So I'm going to just call this one materials budget training. And then I'm going to give my code MT5. My currency is going to be US dollars. I think that'll be the case across the board. And even though I've scoped in my in the grid itself to the system, when I'm creating this new funding source, it has my owner set to the branch where my workstation is. So I am logged in at a Jackson workstation. So it is made the owner of this Jackson. If your system is where if you own your funding sources at the system level, you'll want to make sure that you're scoping this up to that system level, because it will automatically default it to a branch. So I'm going to do that. And once I've got all of this set, I'll save it. Now, I'm going to do two things at this point. I want to prepare my funding sources to be ready to basically apply credit into my funds. And I'm going to do two things for that. And the way that you do this will depend on how your library manages funding sources. Now, if you are a library that just uses the same funding source from year to year, then you'll come into the existing funding source that you did, and you'll click on the hyperlink. And basically what you want to do is you're not able to remove any remaining funds that were not spent from last year. So let's say that your county gives you, $50,000 a year to spend on materials, and that's what you put in your funding source. And by the end of the year, you've spent $49,000 of that. You're still going to have $1,000 left in your amount. Some of you may have a county that allows you to roll that over. Most of you probably don't. So what you'll need to do if you are trying to remove it is you can't actually delete a remaining balance. So you'll need to basically do some math. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. If you already know how much money your county is giving you, you can just sort of add that to the remaining balance. So if I know I'm going to get $100,000 and I've got 93,000 remaining, then a second to pull up a calculator. I would want to add $6,001.13. So I am going to apply credit here of $6,001.13. And I could put in a note saying here, remaining balance from 2024 of 93,998.87, just so that I have that. What you choose to do here is based on what any finance people who look at this as any kind of record will want you to do. Now, some of you do this sort of outside the scope of what you actually, of what your official bookkeeping is, and so you can just make it work whatever way makes sense to you. But for those of you who actually submit this as your official bookkeeping, you'll want to make sure that the way that you are applying credit at this point matches with what your finance department wants. So if they will allow you to sort of do this, this sort of add the balance to get up to the amount that you'll be given by your county this year, then go ahead and do that. If not, this is one of those times where you might want to think about creating a new funding source from your year, so you're starting at zero. So that's up to you, and it's up to what your finance department will allow you to do. I'm going to start my effective date as July 1st. So Matthew asked earlier, if you can do this sort of at any point, and it doesn't have to happen on June 30th. One of the reasons you can do this at any point is because you can backdate most of these effective dates to be the beginning of the fiscal year, even if you're doing it days, weeks, or months later. Now, you can set a deadline if you'd like to. So I could set this deadline to June 30th of next year, or you can leave this blank. That's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and set the deadline. So I'll save that. And so now I have a full $100,000 within this existing funding source from last year. That's a slightly complex way to do it. It's certainly an option for you, but I do think a lot of our libraries, instead of doing that kind of like funny math, will come into their basically create a new funding source. So if I wanted to do that instead, I could come into this new funding source that I created, the MBT 2025, and I could basically do the same thing. I could apply credit, but in this case, I'm just going to do my even $100,000. And I'm going to set it to start July 1st, but I'm not going to put a deadline on it. And I'll just save that, close it. And so now, of course, I have $100,000 in this funding source. Now, because I rolled over encumbrances, and I did have a significant number of encumbrances in the funds that I closed out, looking at the funding source that was from last year, while it has $100,000 total, its balance is a little bit funky because, of course, this includes all those encumbrances. So that's another reason that you may want to start from scratch in terms of funding sources each year. Again, based on what your finance department wants and what makes sense to your library. But I'll go ahead and give everybody a chance to take a look at their funding sources and then determine, are you going to create a new one, or are you going to take your existing funding sources and basically get them up to your allocation. Now, many of you may not know your allocation for the year, and that's okay. You could put in a guess at this point. You will not be able to allocate money into your funds until you have applied the credit to your funding source. So in order to do the allocation that we'll do next, you do have to put something in here. If you want to wait till you get the final amount from your funding source, then please do so. If you have a guess, you can always go in and adjust it, but again, it will be through that sort of math adjustment. You won't be able to edit the existing credit. You'll just be able to add or subtract additional credits, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we saw an addition when we put in the $6,000. If you wanted to remove money, then I could apply credit and I could do a negative amount. So I'll do that. So by doing a negative amount here, I've taken my balance on this funding source from 100,000, or my total credits from 100,000 to 90,000. So if you overshoot, if you estimate that you're going to get $50,000 this year and it turns out you only get 40, you can come in and change that by doing a negative addition. So if you're comfortable doing that, that's the way that you can. But obviously, if you're not comfortable doing that and you'd rather wait until you get the final amount, please feel free to do whatever makes you comfortable, whatever makes your finance department happy. All right, so once we have our funding sources set up, and I'm going to actually go ahead and just deactivate this one at this point. So to deactivate it, I just double clicked on it and then I can uncheck this active box. And I'm only going to work from the new one I set up. So again, whatever your standard practice is or whatever works best for your finance people, make sure that that's what you're doing. The next thing I'm going to do is come back into my funds tab. And from here, I want to filter into 2025 because we want to look at our new funds. Oh, I'm at the Jackson. And I want to be at funds level. So I'm going to apply credit, and that's our next step. So when creating your funds, if you are already using acquisitions, which is most of you, and you have rollover set to true for all of your funds, then most of your funds for the new year should already have a balance on them. And so it's just a matter of bringing that balance up to what the new allocations are. If you're new to acquisitions, or if you don't use rollovers, or if you're creating new funds, then you'll be starting from scratch and need to set up funds. So we're going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to start by creating one new fund, so you can see that from beginning to end. And then we're going to go into our existing funds and we're going to allocate money from our funding source into those. And once again, if you do have questions as we're going along, please stop me. If you're seeing something that doesn't make sense within your evergreen, let me know. We can dig into it. So I'm going to start by creating a new fund. So I'm going to click here on the new fund button at the top. And I am going to first give my fund a name. So just call it Training 2025. And I'll call it P25. And then I'll set it for what is now my current fiscal year, which in this case is going to be 2025. If your last fiscal year was 2023, then you can move this into the 2024 year because that's what you will have propagated to. So it's based on whatever your last fiscal year was. You're just in the next one. My owner here, once again, has defaulted to my workstation. So I'm going to want to take it up to my system level. And then I can choose to make it not active until I'm ready. And so that may be something that you want to do if it's something that, you know, maybe it's based on a grant, and so you're waiting for the grant to come through, or maybe it is you're waiting for your county to give you your final money, and so you don't want to make your fund active until you get that money. There may be a variety of reasons why you might not want to start out with it active. I am going to keep it active to begin with, though. My currency type, again, will be US dollars. And now I have to think about how I want this fund to function this time next year. So if this is a fund that you will be consistently using in future years, you can go ahead and propagate it. If this is a fund that is sort of a one-time use, then you don't want to set that to propagate to true. Rollover, again, this is based on whether or not you roll anything over. If you roll over balances and encumbrances, check this. If you roll over only encumbrances, also check this, because of course the determination about whether it will be a balance or an encumbrance that rolls over happens at the closeout step. So you want to check this right now, regardless of what you roll over, if you roll over anything. If you don't roll over anything, obviously uncheck. And then your balance stop percent, you can set this however you like to. All the other ones in Onslow are set to 195. However, do keep in mind that you can change these throughout the year. So if you want to stop people up until December at 50%, then you can set that there. And I can give a warning at 45. So this allows you to sort of spread your money out throughout the year. And then you could come in January and pop it up to 100 or whatever works for you. Just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to keep this the same as all the others. So once you've got all of this filled out, you'll just save it. And now you have a new fund. So remember, I propagated 17 earlier. And now I have 18 because I have the 17 that I propagated. And then my 18th one down here is the one I just created. And of course, it is set to propagate, yes, next year, but not to roll over next year. And I can change this at any time between now and my closeout next year. So if I decide I am going to be rolling over encumbrances, I can change this at that point. If I decide I will not be propagating this for next year, I can change this prior to my closeout. So that's the process of creating a new fund. Some of you may need to create all new funds. Some of you may need to create a couple. Some of you may not need to create any. So feel free to create a few now. If you do need to do, 25 new funds, then you might want to hold off on all of them until after the workshop. It's up to you. But we are going to go ahead and take a look at how we allocate money into these funds. So I'm going to come into this new one that I created. And this process will be the same whether it's brand new or propagated. And I'm going to create an allocation. So I have to choose the funding source I want. And most of you will not see such a long list because you'll only see the funding sources that are tied to your library. I'm seeing everybody's funding sources because I'm at the global level. So you don't need to worry about things being quite this complicated. The MBT 2025. So I'm going to select that one. And then I'm going to choose how much I'd like to add to this fund. And so now my allocation total is $10,000 within this fund. I haven't bought anything yet. I haven't encumbered anything yet. So that's all I'm seeing. I'm not seeing anything else. My balance matches my total allocation at this point. Now, if I go into one of these that propagated from last year and has a remaining encumbrance, and I create an allocation, then I'm seeing my allocation is 10,000, but my balance is actually less than that because I already have money encumbered against it. So whatever my encumbrance is that I rolled over, those will be subtracted from the allocation to give me the combined balance. So if you are looking at any funds that have encumbered that have money encumbered on them from your closeout, then you're going to see that your combined balance and your allocation total do not match. But if you did not roll anything over, or if there were no encumbrances against that particular fund, or it's a brand new fund, then your allocation total and combined balance will match. Now, another thing that I can do is I can go into this this transfer money button here at the top. And rather than creating a new allocation, I can say, you know what, I shouldn't have given a full $10,000 to that new fund that I created. I call that. All right. So instead, I want to take, say, $3,000 of that, of the 10,000 that I added to this adult book, and put it in a different fund. So I'm going to put it in, once again, you will not get such a long list. You will only see your own funds. Oh gosh, mine's is so long that I have to actually type it. Didn't like that one. RLA. Yeah, all right, we'll do the this adult book fund from Onslow. And you'll see, of course, that you got the new fiscal year listed in the fund code. So we'll put in the amount that I want to transfer between this main library adult books fund and this this branch library's adult book fund. So let's put $2,000. And so now we see that my allocation total for this main library adult book fund has gone from 10,000 to 8,000, and the combined balance is still this total allocation minus everything that's currently encumbered. And if I come into the Richland Adult Books Fund, it now has an allocation total of 2,000, even though I didn't ever allocate anything here directly, because I made that transfer. That's showing up as part of my total allocation. And I can then create an additional allocation here from my funding source. Another 500. And so that's going to take that total allocation up. Now I can come into my allocations tab here, and I can see every part that was allocated. If it was allocated via a transfer, that will show up here in the notes column. I can also look just at transfers in the transfers tab. And so here I'm only seeing the bit that came through the transfer. But I'm going to want to go through and do that for each of my funds and allocate money from my funding source. And this can be based on what you plan to spend throughout the year. It can be sort of a partial allocation. If maybe you allocate, you sort of change your allocations throughout the year. Maybe you start with sort of lower allocations and then you increase them as the year goes on. But basically you'll want to go through and make sure that every fund that you plan to purchase from has money in it so that you can begin purchasing. All right. So at this point, we have created a new funding source. We have created new funds for the year, some of them through propagation, some of them through just creating a new fund from scratch. We have applied credit to our funding sources, and then we have used that credit to allocate money into our individual funds. Once we've done all of that, we are basically ready. So what we would want to do at this point is just go through, make sure that we have a balance on every fund. So add money to each fund that we intend to use. And then you're ready to start purchasing. Are there any questions? Is there anything that somebody would like to see me do again? Well, at this point, we have actually completed the entire end of year process. If you did this along with me, then you are actually ready to start. You may not have finished putting money in all of your funds, but you should at least have a little bit. If you are not quite ready to pull the trigger and you haven't actually done it at this point, then you have everything that you need to do it. But if you do have any questions, feel free to post them on Basecamp or submit a ticket or let me know, whatever way you're comfortable with. And we can dig into whatever you're having problems with. But at this point, we've gone through the whole process. So if there are no more questions, then I am going to go ahead and end the webinar. I'll give just a few more moments in case anything else does come up. And of course, as I said, I will get this recording processed and I'll get it posted on our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with anyone that you think might benefit and rewatch it as needed.
Samantha, I wanted to share something in case it'll help others.
Sure.
I kind of had a light bulb moment.
Okay.
And all the years I've done this, I've always wanted to be ready to know exactly before I did a rollover and closed out the old year. I wanted to know exactly how much money I was going to put in my funds for the new year before I'd even close out the old year. But a light bulb moment is I'm going to do that differently this year. And what I mean by that is I'm going to go ahead and close out last year. And I'm not sure yet, our library director and some admin decisions haven't been made as to how our total amount of materials budget is going to be divided up among our different branches. But I could still close out last year and allow the encumbrances to roll over and allow the tech services staff to continue receiving the stuff that now is arriving that was ordered last year. You're shaking your head. I think I want to do it that way. That way it's accurately debiting those encumbrances. And when I do add money to the funds, it'll just subtract that money already spent out of it. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go at it a little different this year. I always wanted everything perfectly in place, but you know what? I think it would actually help with the accounting if I would just go ahead and close out last year, even if I keep a zero balance in the budget for this year until we know exactly how that money's going to be allocated.
Yep, I think that's absolutely a good option. And if you wait for things to always be perfect, sometimes you wait a long time, especially when it comes to these
And
things.
nothing ever is perfect. Perfect was the wrong word, but yeah,
Yeah.
I was always wanting to know exactly how much money, because we always get, X number of dollars per branch, but then it's an internal decision after our county allocates total money. It's an internal decision among our director and team leaders how money gets divvied up among all the different funds. And I was always waiting to get that answer. And sometimes that doesn't come to like the third week or fourth week of June. Of July, when those meetings can happen and decisions can be made. So I don't know if that helps anybody else. Maybe I just had a light bulb moment watching you today, and I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and roll this over so that our encumbrances roll over. And I always wanted encumbrances to roll over, but the big thing was so that my staff, so that we can start receiving and invoicing things that are arriving this year that was ordered last year. So I don't know. I just had a light bulb moment and I was like, oh, this is great.
That's great. I'm glad that this gave you a chance to see that. So
Thank
that's
you.
awesome. Thank you.